Chapter 24, Orochimaru makes his move. Itachi-kun? The strange demon couldn't understand it. He didn't know who Itachi was or why that name had so much influence to make Orochimaru move. But you! The strange demon wanted to say something, but his body was quickly surrounded by snakes. Come on, there's no need for you to continue existing. Orochimaru smiled, and the muffled growls of the strange demon echoed throughout the place as he was slowly devoured by the small strange snakes. Who is this man? Ria's Gremory opened her eyes wide, looking at the serpent with genuine surprise. She knew it. He's not a demon, angel, or fallen angel. His essence is similar to Itachi's. Ria's Gremory murmured in her mind, then remembered what Orochimaru had said. Those words finally brought some light to her mind and face. Is he a friend of Itachi who came to help? Ria's Gremory wondered with hope. The other girls thought the same, while Issei lay unconscious, fighting between life and death on the floor. I thought your friends would be better than this, Itachi-kun, Orochimaru murmured, looking around the place with a disappointed smile as he saw the demon girls and Issei on the floor. Well, at least they were considerate enough to leave me a little gift. Orochimaru murmured so softly that only his lips could be seen moving as he fixed his gaze on Kiba's lifeless body not far away. A moment later, he calmly walked toward Kiba's headless body, pulling a storage scroll from his cloak. Wait, Ria's Gremory intervened. She lifted her head and looked at Orochimaru with bright eyes. What are you going to do? Who are you? Do you know Itachi? She threw a bunch of questions rapidly. Maybe it was because Orochimaru mentioned Itachi, but she seemed to find strength all of a sudden. The snake looked at Ria's for a moment before opening his mouth. Itachi-kun? Haha, yes, actually, you could say I've known him for many years. My name is Orochimaru, and I've come to save you from death. Isn't it obvious? Orochimaru said, shaking his head as he noticed that Ria's, despite her strong and commanding voice, still couldn't stand. The Gremory princess heard this and saw the pale-skinned stranger walk toward Kiba. She wanted to say something, but for some reason, her mouth wouldn't move. It was as if her mind had frozen the movement of her jaw, preventing her from speaking. She watched with sadness and a bit of anger as Orochimaru used a strange method to make Kiba's body vanish into the scroll. Then, the snake left without saying or doing anything else. It wasn't until an hour later that Ria's Gremory regained full control of her body. She stood up, saw Akino and Kaneko also recovering, and finally sighed. Ria's whispered softly, touching her head as she felt a deep sadness invade her heart. Kiba, the boy she had recruited, had been killed, and then his body was stolen by Orochimaru. President, what should we do? Akino asked not far away, her eyes reflecting the same emotional state as Ria's. HMPH, for now, let's just return to the base. Issei is on the verge of death. We need to help him recover, and then I'll try to talk to Itachi. Ria's quickly came up with a plan and took action. However, a strange feeling lingered in her body. The world is so different from what I knew until recently, she murmured in her mind before getting to work. The next morning, Issei Hyoudou woke up. For some reason, his bed felt softer, his eyes opened. His mind still hazy from not remembering what had happened, he moved automatically. The poor guy sat up slightly and looked around. He felt a small sting in his heart. A strange sensation telling him that something's wrong. He narrowed his eyes and noticed he was in his room, but for some reason, he felt incredibly alone. His body, almost as if guided by muscle memory, moved to hug what should have been two girls. However, there was nothing, just air. He shook his head, and clarity returned to his mind. What happened? Issei narrowed his eyes, sighing with mild surprise before quickly getting to his feet. All he remembered was trying to punch that strange demon, and then his eyes narrowed further. A moment later, D-Drake's voice rang inside his mind. A strange man similar to Itachi arrived and killed that demon, then you were brought here by Ria's Gremory, and finally they healed you. Got it? The cold voice of the dragon echoed in his mind. Issei processed the words and finally nodded. A strange guy similar to Itachi? Issei repeated, looking at himself in a nearby mirror and frowning. His mind was overwhelmed by the thoughts that had thrown him into chaos yesterday. Especially after seeing his goddesses wear expressions that were neither smiles nor serious looks. He didn't want to say it aloud, but for him, Issei Hyoudou, the image of the goddesses Ria's Gremory, Akino Himejima, and even Kaneko had tiny cracks in his mind. "Breakfast is ready, Issei." His mother called from downstairs, and the poor guy quickly got dressed, ready to eat and then head to Kuoh Academy to ask about that guy similar to Itachi. Although Issei went down quickly and started eating, his mind still wandered through the terrified faces and trembling bodies of Ria's, Akino, and Kaneko. Just because they're demons doesn't mean they aren't as human as you are. That phrase echoed in Issei's mind for a moment. He furrowed his brow, looked at his mother not far away in the kitchen, bit his lower lip, and finally asked, "Mom, what do girls like?" Issei asked loudly so his mother could hear. Strange noise. A weird noise came from the kitchen. Issei Hyoudou's mother dropped a spoon and turned her head to look at her son, eyes wide in surprise. Then a mixture of joy and sadness took over her body. HMPH. Mrs. Hyoudou let out a strange, hard-to-understand sound from her mouth. She looked at her son, Issei, before smiling broadly. "My son has finally taken the right path." Happiness could be heard in Mrs. Hyoudou's words. She thought her son, a hopeless pervert, would now become a gentleman who values and cares for women. Chapter 25, Conflicting Thoughts. Issei listened carefully to his dear mother's advice. "You have to be chivalrous, flowers are good, gifts are fine, be attentive, polite, and show interest." He wrote everything down in a small notebook to review later more thoroughly. His eyes were shining. His mind wandered through countless thoughts as his body made its way toward Kuoh Academy. Issei repeated all the phrases his mother had told him in his mind. He was convinced it all made sense. Treating women well, being a gentleman, giving flowers and gifts, being attentive, polite, showing interest. It all genuinely made sense to him. His steps grew faster, and he quickly arrived at Kuoh Academy, heading to the abandoned building next to the school. He had bought some flowers at a nearby store, wrapped them into a bouquet, and rushed up the stairs. In his mind, he imagined Ria's Gremory blushing and accepting the flowers. After that, he'd go to Akino, then to Kaneko. He'd marry them all and have lots of children. However, when Issei opened the door, Ria's Gremory and Akino were deeply focused on reading a strange, massive book. Neither of them paid him any attention as they talked among themselves, speaking words that made Issei narrow his eyes. According to what Sona said, Itachi was warned about the presence of a ninja from his old world. We don't know if it's the same Orochimaru we encountered, but it should be. Akino paused, touching her forehead with weariness. "It should be the same Orochimaru, so I contacted Sona to see if she can get Itachi to visit us today." Once she finished saying that, Akino smiled and looked at her tired friend. Ria's Gremory's face was a mix of emotions, from exhaustion to a sort of uncertainty, before it finally shifted to a smile. "Itachi, huh?" she murmured with some calm before letting out a sigh. Issei saw this and narrowed his eyes. "Something's not right," he murmured in his mind. Why did the president react like that? Itachi hasn't been kind, hasn't been attentive, wasn't polite, and yet... Issei narrowed his eyes again, starting to feel that maybe his mother had lied to him. Still, he shook his head and stepped forward. "President." Issei cleared his throat slightly before speaking, catching the attention of the two demon girls. "A flower for another beautiful flower." "Is," said the words his mother had taught him earlier that morning. Ria's face turned confused. She looked at Issei with slightly wide eyes and raised eyebrows. Then she took the bouquet of roses and smiled softly. "Thank you, Issei, you're a good boy," she said. Akino also gave an approving smile. Issei's heart quickly filled with a special joy. A wide smile spread across his face, and he blushed like a tomato. Thank you, President," the poor boy said before taking several steps out of the room. Issei's behavior was erratic. His legs trembled, and he kept his eyes low. It would have been considered adorable if it had been done by a girl. Ria's Gremory stared at the door after Issei left and finally let out a calm sigh. "Issei seems to be maturing a bit. What happened yesterday was..." "Never mind," she said, shaking her head with a bit of guilt. "Yesterday was an exception, President. Not even all of us together could defeat that strange demon, and..." Akino narrowed her eyes with nostalgia. The absence of Kiba could be felt throughout the room. Ria's also nodded before simply sighing. She threw the bouquet into a nearby trash bin almost absent-mindedly, before turning her attention back to the book on her desk. Time passed at cruise speed. Classes started at Kuoh and recess came quickly too. Itachi was promptly informed by Tsubaki that Ria's Gremory wanted to speak with him about Orochimaru. At that moment, the ninja's expression changed almost completely. His pupils dilated slightly, his gaze on Tsubaki sharpened, becoming more intense. Tsubaki Shinra noticed the change in Itachi. She raised her eyebrows, took a few steps back, let out a choked breath, and swallowed hard as she looked down. "Itachi, has something bad happened?" she asked. However, Itachi simply ignored her, stood up, turned around, and began walking. The day was overcast, with some storms threatening to fall, and Kuoh City was covered in a sort of dark veil. Itachi walked down the halls again, scanning his surroundings, analyzing the peace of this world. Students chatting, laughing, arguing, many girls glanced at him shyly as he passed. All of it gave him a feeling of unprecedented calm. But, is it really possible to preserve this peace? Itachi asked himself in his mind. Halfway through, he ran into his old friend, Issei Hyoudou. The boy was walking next to a cute girl, though she didn't have much of a figure. Issei quickly noticed Itachi. His eyes widened slightly as he recalled Ria's Gremory's words earlier. How her face lit up with life when she talked about the ninja. The poor boy narrowed his eyes, finally remembering how that strange demon had nearly killed him, and then how the red-haired president had blushed at his gift that morning. Issei finally smiled confidently. He raised a hand to greet Itachi and said, "Bro, good to see you." However, Itachi wasn't stupid. He noticed the shift in Issei's face, the way he initially looked at him with a bit of hatred, and how it ended with a touch of mockery. Itachi simply walked up to Issei and nodded. "Issei, you're here. How have you been lately?" Itachi asked, raising an eyebrow, observing Issei's condition, and then focusing his gaze on the small Kuryuu beside his friend. She quickly hid behind Issei as if Itachi were some kind of girl-eating beast. "I can say, I'm making progress, do you know? My mom gave me some tips on how to pick up girls." Issei lifted his head proudly, but Itachi just sighed. Back in Konoha, he had met many boys who followed their mom's advice to pick up girls' hearts, and all he could say about that was, they never work. "I see," Itachi said, staring at Issei for a moment, as if expecting him to continue the conversation. As the ninja predicted, Issei grew embarrassed under his gaze and opened his mouth again. "I actually wanted to ask you something." Issei's face turned serious almost instantly as he spoke. "You?" Issei narrowed his eyes. "Do you really think an ugly girl is the same as a pretty girl?" he asked. He had been questioning that for some time. "You told me that the bones of a pretty girl are the same as those of an ugly girl, that their skin is made of the same stuff." "But that doesn't seem to make sense," Issei demanded. Akira Kuryuu peeked her head out, still keeping her body hidden behind Issei, and stared wide-eyed at Itachi. "Is this really Itachi's way of thinking?" she wondered, a tiny spark lighting in her heart, making her smile. "If that's the case then, I don't have to be a pretty girl to be appreciated by Itachi," Akira thought, her eyes gleaming. Chapter 26, A Bit of Enlightenment. Itachi looked at Issei for a moment, raised his hand, and lightly tapped his forehead with 2 fingers while smiling. "It's not that I think an ordinary girl is the same as a pretty girl, but tell me, what do you want most in a girl?" he asked, grinning mysteriously. Issei quickly pushed Itachi's hand away, narrowed his eyes, and said, "I just want someone fun to hang out with." He puffed out his chest proudly. There was a brief moment of silence. Itachi nodded with a wider smile. "Fun to hang out with, huh? Damn, and I thought I raised you well." He feigned disappointment, touching his chest dramatically. Kuryuu chuckled, watching Issei stomp his foot in frustration. "You knew what I meant from the start, don't act surprised," Issei muttered. But Itachi only made an even sadder face. "Bro, you are clueless," Itachi blushed slightly. Kuryuu burst out laughing. Just as Issei was about to stomp again, Itachi stopped him. "It's not about looks, it's just a silly way to make you think. Don't get it yet?" Itachi sighed. Issei tilted his head, confused. "He's calling you silly, bro," D-Drake murmured in Issei's mind. "What he means is, when it comes to hanging out, it doesn't really matter if someone's pretty or ordinary. Fun is fun. Issei blinked, slowly understanding. Itachi looked around, then at Issei. You're such an idiot, bro. How do you even pass the academy exams? He leaned in, close to Issei's ear, grinning. What I mean is, enjoying time with someone isn't about their looks. Whether it's a quiet kid in the corner or the class superstar, the experience is mostly the same if you just pay attention. Get it now. Issei's face turned red. He took several steps back, blinked at Itachi, and muttered under his breath before running back to his classroom, flustered. Several students watched him dash away, wondering what had just happened. Kuoh, however, had heard Itachi's words. She wasn't embarrassed like Issei. She tilted her head, narrowed her eyes, and stepped closer to Itachi. Hey Itachi, if you really believe that, maybe we should hang out sometime, she whispered teasingly. Hehe, Itachi chuckled, patting her head gently with a paternal smile. Sorry, not this time. HMPH, 10, Kuoh muttered under her breath, glancing at him mischievously. 10 what? Itachi asked, raising an eyebrow before shaking his head. You wouldn't be able to handle my boring personality, he joked, walking toward the occult research club. Kuoh watched him leave, smirking to herself, then returned to her usual demeanor. Itachi soon arrived at the occult research club. The door opened almost automatically. He saw Ria's gremmery staring out the window, lost in thought. Did you know there are moments when we just feel invisible? Ria's murmured, not turning to look at Itachi. She had been doing this for a while, and Itachi calmly approached and sat in the chair across from her desk. I suppose you already know why I came, Ria said, turning halfway to study him. She thought back to the previous day, feeling small in comparison to her powerful brother. Ria's bit her lower lip, narrowed her eyes, and looked at Itachi with hidden intentions. I don't know why, but I feel like you shouldn't exist in this universe. You're unique. Itachi smiled, shaking his head slightly. Unique. Yes, there's no human capable of what you do, and you come from another world. Sona speculated something about wormholes, but I'm not sure, Ria said, curious. Since learning of your existence, strange things have been happening. I feel a pressure in my heart, in my soul, something's off. Do you understand? Ria's reached out and gently held Itachi's hands. My heart is racing. It's weird, I feel strange. Itachi, can you help me? She asked softly. Itachi gently moved his hand away, smiling serenely. That's not why I'm here, he said calmly. Ria's eyes widened. The simple act of declining politely felt like a rejection, though it wasn't personal. She clenched her teeth but forced a calm smile. Itachi, she murmured, slightly flustered. Are you not interested in anyone? Not really, Itachi replied calmly. Ria's laughed lightly. Well, it's fine, being selective isn't bad. Actually, it's kind of admirable. Itachi stood and walked toward the exit, his expression neutral. If you don't need information about Orochimaru, then I have nothing to do here, he said softly. Ria's realized how she'd been carried away by her emotions. She quickly stood up. Itachi, I'm sorry, she said, shaking her head. Chapter 27, Talking about Orochimaru. Itachi stopped just as he was about to open the door to leave the room. He stood there for a moment before speaking. Orochimaru was a scientist in my old world. Itachi began to narrate the life of Orochimaru, from his birth, how he grew up, his influence in the ninja world, and his experiments. The more Riaz listened to the ninja's words, the more amazed she became. Her mind traveled to a particular world, the ninja world. In her heart, a calm, silent, and simply special feeling began to arise. Her hands intertwined, she stood up and watched the people walking past her window. When she heard the part about Orochimaru killing the third Hokage, she smiled for some reason. Then she squinted when Itachi said the snake had recovered his arms. Finally, he spoke of how he sealed Orochimaru, and then could only repeat the same words Orochimaru had said that day. In the end, Riaz sighed. It had started to rain outside. She looked at the people outside, each protecting themselves from the rain with umbrellas. She sighed again. If everyone in the world could use chakra, then how would the world change with that? She asked in a low voice, however, her words reached Itachi's heart. If every person could use chakra, then, well... Itachi stopped, looked at Ria's gremmery for a moment before smiling, then frowned. Hey, why are you crying? Ria squinted at Itachi's words, turned around to look at the ninja. Then, confused, raised her right hand, gently touched her cheek and noticed moisture. "Why am I crying?" Riaz asked herself. When Itachi told the story of Orochimaru, describing life in Konoha, she truly felt something specific, the feeling of emptiness in her heart, the sense that something was wrong with this world. All those bad feelings changed in an instant, and she felt calm, relaxed. "I see," she said before sighing, then she remembered Surzech again. Deep down, she knew it was impossible. Although she was proud and saw herself as a princess, it was impossible for her to surpass her brother. Then Riaz raised her head. She felt truly tempted by this new energy that ninjas could use. "Chakra," she muttered, then looked at Itachi like a child on the verge of discovering a treasure. "Itachi, can you teach me to use chakra?" she asked. However, Itachi quickly shook his head. "Why should I?" he asked, turned around and left the room. The sound of the door closing was like a direct blow to Riaz Gremory's heart. Her recent hope had disappeared easily, her face full of discouragement and disappointment as she clenched her hands tightly. However, despite this, in Riaz Gremory's mind, a new goal was set. If I could control chakra, then I would be comparable to Surzech's. Kaneko, who was hiding not far away, also felt this. However, her attention was on different words that Itachi had said: snake sage mode, senjutsu. She knew that senjutsu in Itachi's world meant something different from the senjutsu in this world. She frowned, a rare gesture for an expressionless girl, and decided to seek out Itachi to ask him to teach her senjutsu or sage mode. However, Akino, who was in a nearby room and had heard everything, sighed. She was not so interested in power. In reality, what she most regretted in her life was the death of her mother, and that would not be fixed with chakra. "Forget it," Akino told herself before continuing to bake some cupcakes. Time passed quickly, and classes ended. Itachi returned home as soon as the bell rang. He opened the door of his house and found Asia Argento finishing setting the table. He smiled again and patted the girl's head as if patting a cat. "Asia," Itachi smiled. The girl blushed, moved slightly, and was about to say something sweet when her nose caught a particular scent. "Hey," Asia got a little closer to Itachi, extending her arms to hug him. She took a breath, smelling a scent of roses mixed with Itachi's soft, natural scent. She raised her head, still hugging Itachi, and looked at him with a serious expression. "Itachi." The ninja was surprised. He raised his eyebrows and looked at Asia's intense expression and smiled slightly, as if asking, "What's wrong?" But Asia did not return the smile. "Have you been hiding secrets from me?" Asia asked, almost too loudly. There was a brief moment of silence. Itachi opened his eyes in surprise. Asia stomped the ground hard, pouted, and hugged Itachi even tighter. You can't keep secrets from me because," Asia blushed. Itachi didn't understand why Asia was acting like this. He was about to say, "But we're just friends," but he stopped, looked at her determined gaze, and finally patted her head. "She kind of resembles Izumi," Itachi murmured in his mind while stroking Asia's head. Although if Sasuke were here, he would yell, "She looks nothing like Izumi." "Because you are mine, Itachi," Asia finally whispered. She hid her face in the ninja's shirt and hugged him even tighter. Itachi opened his eyes wide. He felt Asia's warm embrace. The feelings she expressed, though strong, were now clearly affectionate in a wholesome way. Some time later. The theory of using chakra is simple. It's about condensing physical energy and spiritual energy. Let me help you. In the backyard, protected from the falling rain by a pergola, Itachi was giving instructions while Asia sat on the dry grass. He gently touched Asia's forehead. "You might feel something here. These are 2 chakra points, known as the Gate of Life and the Gate of Opening," he explained. Asia nodded, focusing on the energy rather than anything else. Itachi continued the lesson carefully, demonstrating the flow of chakra through hand movements and meditation techniques. Asia tried to follow his instructions, concentrating on mastering the chakra control without any inappropriate interaction. "Now feel the energy flow through you and focus on control," Itachi instructed. Asia focused intently, her excitement now fully dedicated to learning rather than anything else. Chapter 28, fiancé arrives. The next day, Issei Hyoudou woke up, ready to go to Kuoh Academy. This time, he was carrying a box of chocolates for Rias. He stood up and shouted, "I'm ready!" With energy and bravery, he got dressed, had breakfast, and quickly ran through the streets, determined to find the best chocolate shop. He was excited, imagining Ria's reaction, blushing and very cute. "I'm a good guy," he murmured to himself while blushing, and just as he planned, he went through several streets and finally reached the Occult Research Club. He went up the stairs to the main room, opened the door with confidence and determination, but a slightly different scene was waiting for him. The room where the girls used to gather had changed, not because of furniture being moved, but because someone else was inside. No, not just someone. Issei, holding a box of premium chocolates, stepped forward and looked at the new demons inside. His eyes met those of a blonde-haired man with an arrogant face. I can sense the demonic aura of this boy, but it seems far too weak. Is this your new acquisition? My love, Riser hugged the voluptuous red-haired girl, sitting on his lap with more strength. Rias, however, did not resist. She allowed Riser to hold her tightly by the waist. Her eyes were half closed, as she felt something slightly hard yet soft pressing against her rear. Issei's reaction, however, was different. He didn't get angry. He didn't demand answers. He simply looked at Rias with an apparently emotionless face. He watched her for a long time before letting the box of chocolates in his right hand fall. He felt his heart crack as his eyes sparkled a little too much. His expression changed from excitement to confusion, and finally he put on a serious face. He quickly shook his head, pushing down the feelings in his heart before asking, "Excuse me, who is he?" Issei took a step forward, almost unconsciously, or perhaps consciously, stepping on the chocolate box. Rias noticed this. She said nothing. She just kept a blank expression as she answered, "He's my fiancé, Riser Phoenix, Issei. Could you help Akino prepare some tea for Riser?" she said, not showing much interest in explanations or what Issei had brought. The poor boy nodded and quickly walked to the kitchen, without even looking at Riser again. However, the poor boy couldn't stop wondering about many things. What had gone wrong? Why? Why didn't Ria's gremmerie show any expression of discomfort toward Riser? Why didn't his mother's advice for pick-up girls work? As he thought about this, Issei began to move almost mechanically. Riser observed this with amusement, hugging Ria's even tighter and placing his other hand on her soft, firm, yet smooth thigh, gently rubbing it. Ria's gremmerie, however, couldn't find the strength to resist. It wasn't that she liked Riser. She simply had too many things on her mind. "Riser, we're not married yet. You should move your hands away from me," she murmured. However, Riser ignored her. "Sona has called someone to help us reach an agreement through a rating game or a duel," Rias proposed. There was a short silence in the room before Phoenix began to laugh loudly. "Ha ha ha," Riser leaned back against the sofa. "Seriously? Ha ha ha, you in a rating game against me? I won't even mention a duel." The Phoenix found it hilarious. He couldn't help but mock her. However, before Riser could make another comment, the door to the room opened again. A black-haired, black-eyed boy calmly entered through the doorway, followed by Sona Citri. The sudden appearance of Itachi drew everyone's attention. Riser, Rias, Kaneko, and the girls in Riser's peerage all turned their heads toward him. Everyone in the room realized it immediately. Itachi's aura was simply that of a human. Not a demon, not an angel, not even a fallen angel, just a human. Riser squinted his eyes, looked at Rias, then at Sona walking behind Itachi. In his mind, he was genuinely surprised. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the black-haired boy. "Who are you?" he asked. However, Itachi did not respond. He had come at Sona Citri's request and was simply here to do the dirty work. Even so, Itachi hesitated. His eyes narrowed. His gaze became dangerous as he looked at everyone in the room. "Should I kill them all and then escape?" he asked himself. After all, the people here, as far as he could tell, were all demons that didn't surpass his power. Exposing myself to the high-ranking demon lords like this, Itachi considered. Sona had asked him to participate in a duel or rating game to help Ria's gremmerie get out of her wedding engagement. Itachi understood what this meant. Making his existence known in the underworld, however, he also knew something else. Riaz and Sona have probably already informed the demon lords about my existence, so there's no need. He quickly came to a conclusion. He had confirmed that Riaz and Sona didn't seem to have any intention of capturing or killing him. Instead, they appeared very willing to cooperate. Even so, Itachi remained cautious. I'm Itachi Uchiha. I challenge you to a duel. Rise or Phoenix, if I win, Riaz will no longer be your fiancé. Itachi said, watching Riser, the Phoenix demon, to the surprise of his peerage, maintained a serious expression and attitude. Ubaluna was the first to react, her slightly dilated eyes focused on her master. A strange feeling passed through her veins as she squinted. What's going on with you today, Riser? She wondered silently. It wasn't normal for her master to wear a serious expression. However, Riser simply pushed Riaz off his lap, looked at Itachi with the same serious gaze, and leaned forward. Itachi Uchiha, huh? He repeated. You know, it's strange, ever since you walked in, I've felt something different in the air. Is it some kind of sacred gear? Riser asked. The Phoenix demon focused his gaze on Itachi. His eyes didn't blink. He was paying close attention to Itachi's body, trying to find some way he might be affected by magic. However, everything in his body seemed normal. Actually, Itachi smiled. He knew what Riser meant. When a ninja reached a certain experience, a single look from him could awaken many feelings in the enemy and trigger their most primal fears. No, I don't have any sacred gear, but that's not important. Do you accept the duel? Itachi asked. He took several steps forward, placed his hands in his pockets, and didn't take his eyes off Riser. A duel, huh? Riser repeated again. He stood up from the chair and looked at Itachi, sacred gear wielder. It's incredible that Riaz still hasn't recruited you to become a demon, he said, clearly not believing Itachi's words. Still, having a sacred gear doesn't make you invincible. It seems you haven't seen the world beyond your nose. Riser took 2 steps forward. The temperature in the room began to rise. Ubaluna and the other girls in Riser's peerage went on alert. They didn't say a word. They didn't feel like joking with someone that Riser was taking seriously. Ignorance, Itachi smiled, took 2 steps forward and finally sighed. Probably, but is that something that would stop me from killing you? The ninja said. The next moment, Itachi moved at great speed. Chapter 29, Fight. What? Everyone in the room was stunned. Riaz Gremory and Sona Citri, who were watching, couldn't help but let out small gasps of surprise. Their hearts stopped for a moment. Almost instantly, Itachi appeared in front of Riser Phoenix, his right hand raised, palm touching the demon's chest. Watch this, you couldn't even dodge, Itachi said calmly. Right now, I'm touching your chest. I could have attacked, and you'd be done, the ninja spoke, and Riser Phoenix's face paled. His eyes widened, and he couldn't help but look at Itachi with a hint of surprise and fear in his heart. Sona Citri, not far away, opened her mouth. She was about to say something, but couldn't. Her lips moved like a fish out of water. In her heart, Itachi had reached a new level. Is this your true power, Itachi? Sona murmured, swallowing hard. A chill ran down her spine as she recalled what Riaz had told her earlier. Itachi defeated my entire peerage, including me. Those words from days ago had already shocked her. But now, Sona believed Itachi's power might be far greater than she imagined. I hadn't even considered. She muttered softly. Then, what is your true power, Itachi? She narrowed her eyes in curiosity. On the other hand, Riaz Gremory felt her veins freeze. She hadn't seen Itachi's movement at all. It could be said that the ninja had reached a level unimaginable to her. Previously, when he fought me, was he holding back? Riaz couldn't help but think. Then she sighed and truly felt that Itachi might be someone terrifyingly powerful. Still, Riaz stepped forward, watching Riser and Itachi, watching the cautious gaze of the Phoenix and the cold stare of the ninja, both observing each other. Ahem, gentlemen, you cannot fight here, Riaz paused, waiting to draw everyone's attention. We should organize a proper duel. Tusk, Riser finally reacted. He raised his hand and grabbed Itachi's arm. Get your hand off me, he shouted angrily, trying to shove Itachi's hand away from his chest. However, Riser's eyes widened in shock. His strength was not enough to move Itachi's arm. As he squeezed it, it felt as if he wasn't applying any pressure at all. He quickly looked down at the Itachi's arm. It's just a normal arm. Then why? The Phoenix demon was about to demand an answer when someone appeared through a teleportation circle. Lady Grafia. Lady Grafia. Both Riaz and Sona greeted the white-haired woman in a maid outfit who stepped out of the teleportation circle. Riser's girls, who were about to act, stopped, and everyone in the room turned to Grafia. Lady Grafia, Riser said, his hand still on Itachi's arm, but his gaze focused on the woman. She narrowed her eyes, and the room's temperature dropped drastically in an instant. I've received the reports from Lady Seraphal. You. Grafia took 2 steps forward, her eyes focusing on Itachi. You must be Sir Itachi, right? She smiled. I ask that you please stop intimidating Lord Riser. The temperature dropped further, yet Itachi simply watched Grafia. For him, this level of cold was still acceptable. He thought for a moment before lowering his hand. Normally, duels are only allowed between devils, never between a human and a devil. Seraphal must know this, however. Grafia looked at Itachi with curiosity. Seraphal has spoken about your rarity, Sir Itachi. We can make an exception as long as you're willing to speak with us and share some of your knowledge. Itachi took 2 steps forward, his gaze calm and serene. I don't know any demon named Seraphal, hee, but I think I know what this is all about. Itachi smiled, looking first at Sona in the corner, then at Grafia. Don't take it personally, Sir Itachi, but your origin is quite unique. It's a matter that deserves discussion, don't you agree? Grafia leaned forward slightly, as if asking for forgiveness. I'm not talking about that. Itachi narrowed his eyes. The underworld is a powerful force, I know. But is it really so easy to make decisions without consulting me? He said, and Grafia watched him. They locked eyes for a moment. Then Grafia made a swift and precise move, shifting her body and swinging her left arm forward with force. Itachi had already predicted the attack. To demonstrate his strength, he moved his body and extended a palm to intercept Grafia's fist. They moved so fast that most of the demons in the room only saw 2 blurry images rushing at high speed to collide with each other. Hit. Thud. A powerful noise like thunder echoed throughout the room. Palm and fist collided, the floor beneath them cracked, and a powerful gust of wind swept through the room, sending objects flying. HMPH. Ria's gremmery covered her face to prevent the flying debris from hitting her eyes. She looked on in shock at the clash between Grafia and Itachi. Amazing, Sona Citri smiled almost too broadly as she observed. She also covered her face, while Riser watched with a cold stare. Gradually, the wind calmed, and everything returned to normal. However, Grafia and Itachi continued to stare at each other, each trying to read the other's thoughts. Itachi, Seraphal has told me you could be of great help to us. The devils, if you cooperate, then we will help you in return, she said, smiling slightly. Itachi was intrigued. He withdrew his palm as Grafia pulled back her fist. What kind of help? He asked. Well, you're a human from another world. Sona told me you don't want to become a devil, and that's fine, but help us make the demons able to use chakra. It is not necessary to succeed, and in return we can give you many benefits, including sacred gears. Grafia puffed up her chest, proud as she spoke. Sacred gear? Itachi repeated softly. He knew it was what Issei had inside his body. Sacred gear are usually a good thing, however. This world is still a mystery. How about some information exchange? He nodded. Grafia smiled brightly, clapping her hands. Don't worry, Sir Itachi. She seemed overly pleased with the ninja's words. Naturally, we can teach you all about this world, if you teach us about chakra. Itachi nodded at Grafia, and she bowed forward again. Then I'll speak with Lord Surzets. For now, your recent problem with Riser. What do you think of a duel? Before Grafia could finish her sentence, Riser took a firm step forward. I refuse. This human has nothing to do with the wedding between Riaz and me. It's impossible for him to fight me. Riser shouted, looking at Grafia with a determined expression as he patted his chest. Coward! Coward! Sona Citri and Riaz Gremmery exclaimed at the same time. They walked closer to Grafia. Riaz pointed an accusing finger at Riser and shouted again, You're afraid Itachi will beat you, aren't you? Tusk! Riser took a step back. In truth, he was afraid. He had seen the power clash between Itachi and Graphia and knew that level was far beyond his own. My love, that's not it. Itachi is a human from another world. Whatever that means, he has nothing to do with our affairs. Riser spoke with elegance as he adjusted his suit. Ha ha ha! Sona Citri burst into laughter at Riser's obviously false words. Chapter 30, Rating Game. Riser Fenix is right. In fact, Lord Sursech has been thinking about this. Although Lady Serafal is very influential, the decision still rests with the head of the family, Graphia said, her words quickly bringing a smile to Riser's face. But Lady Graphia, Riaz couldn't find the words to refute her sister-in-law's words. She pursed her lips, lowered her head, and looked quite discouraged. I will talk to Lord Sursech about this, Miss Riaz. Once he has made a decision, then we will decide what to do, Graphia said, smiling in Riaz's direction and raising her hand to pat the girl on the head. Anyway, if the head of the family decides that Itachi cannot fight Riser, there is still the rating game. Graphia said, uttered a few more words, and then withdrew through a transport circle. Riser and his girls did the same, but the Fenix gave Itachi a cautious, cold look, said nothing, and then left. There was a slight silence in the room. Soon, Aquino, Issei, and Kaneko came out of an adjoining room, carrying trays with tea and cookies on them. Well, we didn't think it was appropriate to intervene at that moment. Aquino's voice sounded a little apologetic. She gestured, and Issei and Kaneko began to hand out cookies and cups of tea. The cat girl approached Itachi with a tray and a bright face, extending the tray forward, indicating to Itachi to take a cup and cookies. Strangely, her face seemed a little more determined than her usual cold expression. Itachi did not refuse, grabbing a cup and 2 cookies. Thank you, he said before sitting down on a chair not far away. Kaneko followed him. He noticed the girl's actions but said nothing. Once he sat down, he looked into Kaneko's cat eyes with curiosity. Can you teach me how to use Senjutsu and the Snake Sage mode? Kaneko's voice sounded soft, direct, with a trace of anticipation in it, and she looked at Itachi with bright eyes. There was a brief moment of silence. Everyone in the room stopped what they were doing and turned to look at Itachi and Kaneko. Snake Sage mode, huh? And Senjutsu? Itachi repeated Kaneko's words, smelled the tea and found nothing wrong with it, took a sip, and finally nodded. I don't control the Snake Sage mode, nor Senjutsu, Orochimaru does that, so why don't you just train like you've been doing up until now? Itachi smiled and patted Kaneko's head as if he were patting little Sasuke's head. However, the cat girl narrowed her eyes with some disappointment. Her heart, previously filled with hope, was sent into a void as quickly as Itachi's words reached her ears. She bit her lower lip and looked at Itachi. Orochimaru, is that the mysterious white man who looks like a woman? At Kaneko's question, the ninja nodded a couple of times. She narrowed her eyes again, thought for a moment, and was about to ask something when Riaz spoke. We can't talk to Orochimaru, that man is evil, Riaz observed Itachi as she spoke. I forgot to mention that he took Kiba's body, I don't know for what purpose. There was another moment of silence. Itachi sighed slightly before opening his mouth. Kiba is probably being used for Edo Tensei. His words immediately caught the attention of everyone in the room. Edo Tensei is a prohibited technique. It resurrects the dead as immortal beings whose chakra and physical strength are infinite, and they follow the orders of the one who used the technique, the ninja explained calmly. Everyone in the room let out a small gasp. Something like this really made Sona Citri open her eyes in surprise and Riaz look at Itachi with admiration. In a corner, Aquino's eyes shone brightly, but went out the next moment. Edo Tensei, an immortal body, thousands of ways to revive, and yet you managed to seal him, Itachi, you are. Riaz smiled after speaking, amazing. The small talk started by Kaneko distracted everyone in the room from the topic of Riaz's wedding, and in the end, everyone started talking, asking questions about the ninja world. However, among everyone, Kaneko remained silent, watching Itachi, thinking to herself, remembering her sister, and finally clenching her fists tightly. Orochimaru? Kaneko murmured softly before shaking her head. Itachi watched the cat girl's behavior out of the corner of his eye and frowned slightly. Itachi noticed something peculiar about Issei that day. He was discouraged, not asking as many questions as Rias, Aquino, and Sona, instead keeping to himself. Time passed at cruising speed, and the day came to an end. Night falls quickly, and Issei calmly watches from his room as people walk down the street not far away. He is thinking. The president was being forced to marry, so she couldn't refuse Riser's advances, but why? Issei wonders aloud. He had found the bouquet of flowers he had bought when he went to throw out the club's trash at the end of the day in the trash room. His reaction upon seeing the bouquet of roses that he had been so excited to buy was disappointment. His wide eyes looked with genuine surprise and almost anger at the red roses, each stained with a strange liquid garbage juice. The wrapping had almost disappeared due to moisture, and the stems were broken. He remembered his mother's words that day, "Treat them well, roses are good, be kind and respectful." In his mind, that made sense. Didn't all women want to be treated well? But then why? My mother wouldn't lie to me, would she? Issei wondered, beginning to doubt even whether his mother was telling him the truth. Yes, I don't think she would play a joke like that on me, he muttered under his breath. He continued to watch the people on the street as he thought. But then, why does Itachi, who isn't even nice to Rias, seem to have all her attention? Issei wondered. He noticed how Rias looked at Itachi. There was a small trace of the fanaticism he saw when the normal girls at Kuoh looked at Kiba. Sona Citri also seemed to be in the same condition as the president, Issei muttered again. Finally, he opened his eyes, stood up, and seemed to understand something. What is it about Itachi? The poor boy asked. Itachi has never praised a girl for her beauty. He's always the cool bad boy, the one who gets attention, he's handsome, and he's also powerful. Issei repeated the ninja's qualities. Then he thought of Kiba. Although they weren't the same, they had almost the same profile. Bingo! Issei slammed his fist into his palm. Bad boy, handsome, powerful, and also ignoring girls. Issei repeated his thoughts as he smiled. In Issei's mind, a mocking, audible laugh was heard, but the poor boy ignored that laugh and repeated to himself. Bad boy, handsome, powerful, and also ignores girls. In an abandoned warehouse. Here, a figure suddenly appears, begins to search the place, and soon picks up a particular smell. The figure is Kaneko, and she has returned to the abandoned warehouse where she once fought the strange demon. She tapped the walls of the place, and her mind began to remember that scene. She remembered how she was completely overwhelmed by the strength of the strange demon, how Kiba died, how they were about to be killed when the guy appeared. Kaneko stood right where Orochimaru had been when he took out the scroll to store Kiba's body. Her eyes shone with a kind of anticipation as she smelled the scent in the air. Orochimaru, she murmured, then looked at the palm of her hand. She remembered her sister's face and finally what had happened. She narrowed her eyes tightly and clenched her fist. Meanwhile, watching her from a corner without Kaneko noticing, Itachi analyzed the situation. He had sensed something strange in Kaneko's behavior, so he decided to follow her. Although Asia was a little angry, she understood that he sometimes had to go out at night. I don't know why she reminds me of Sasuke, Itachi muttered under his breath. He watched as Kaneko walked around the warehouse, seemingly remembering the past, and finally watched as she left without doing anything else. Should I tell Ria's Gremory? Itachi thought. She shouldn't fall into Orochimaru's hands that almost never ends well. He remembered how Sasuke ended up after being trained by the snake. Chapter 31, Reality Check. The next day. Chakra, Itachi murmured, standing in the kitchen while Asia wasn't far from him. He turned halfway around, curiously focused on the girl, and finally felt it. The 8 chakra points in Asia's body were completely unlocked. The girl looked at Itachi with a blush on her cheeks, narrowed her eyes, puffed out her chest, and smiled, showing her white teeth. Her face said, "Praise me, Itachi," while she stood on her tiptoes to appear a little taller. I see, Itachi said after a moment. He didn't say it, didn't show it, but a small current of electricity ran through his body, carrying a pleasant sensation and a particular kind of pride into his mind. He took 2 steps forward and called Asia like someone would call a child. The girl lowered her head, now fully red from blushing, and approached Itachi. What will happen? What will Itachi do? Asia wondered in her mind. Her skin tingled, the blush on her face deepened, she closed her eyes and almost unconsciously lifted her head, as if expecting something to touch her lips. However, "You've done a good job, Asia." Itachi pressed 2 fingers against the girl's forehead, smiled warmly, and with his other hand patted her head, barely able to hold in his laughter at the cute pose she was making. She opened her eyes and simultaneously pouted, narrowing them to glare at Itachi with playful malice. "Itachi," Asia murmured, but then flirtatiously smiled as she enjoyed Itachi's hand stroking her head. Time passed at cruise speed, and several hours went by. At Kuoh Academy. Here, Itachi walked calmly toward his classroom. He was ready for another normal day at the academy when he noticed something odd in the tree section of the schoolyard. His eyes focused, he spotted Issei Hyoudou, noticed Kuryuu beside him looking a bit too excited, and finally realized the poor guy was doing some sort of performance. Itachi approached curiously, hiding behind some trees while he watched. "Hey, I know I don't care, but would you like to go out with me?" Issei struck a pose that Itachi found ridiculous, puffed his chest, smiled almost smugly, looked at Kuryuu, and made exaggerated gestures. "Yes," Kuryuu shouted, her eyes sparkling for some reason, her blush intense. Itachi noticed something interesting about the girl. A drop fell from between her thighs. It was a drop of thick white liquid. "Me, Issei, together, really?" Akira wondered in her mind. She smiled gracefully. This boy, Issei, had found an excuse to practice being a bad boy. All this, just to confess his love to her. Akira thought so. HMPH. The ninja watched this with a smile. Issei seemed to be acting like an outdated bad boy from over a century ago. He shook his head and was about to leave when he heard something particular. "Kuryuu, do you think Itachi is too attractive?" Issei asked, catching Itachi's attention and making him stay hidden to listen. "I mean, Itachi always gets the attention of the Academy's goddesses. Ria seems to have fallen for him, yet I'm still." "Well, me," Issei muttered. Akira's expression shifted from excitement to surprise. I do think so, Issei, but..." Kuryuu hesitated, stepped forward to hold the poor boy's hands, lifted her head and looked into his eyes. To Itachi's surprise, Issei, though laughing and acting cheerfully moments ago, now had eyes shining with the threat of tears. Kuryuu felt it, pursed her lips. She understood why Issei was in this state. She'd been with him for a while, and although she liked to flirt and tease other guys, her heart had belonged to him for a while. "Issei," Kuryuu murmured, "Itachi is like that because he's handsome, and he doesn't seem interested in girls. You're different," she said, smiled, and made eye contact with the poor boy. "You're Issei Hyoudou, trying to change your attitude to appeal more to girls is fine, I mean." She paused, noticing Issei's serious and slightly annoyed face. She sighed and finally opened her mouth again. "I mean, it's a good thing you want to improve, but I'm afraid it's not possible." Kuryuu's words made something stir inside Issei's heart. His once lively eyes started losing their shine, and his previously cheerful gaze turned into one of resentment. "Why?" the boy asked. "I want to be me. I want to have girls at my disposal. I've realized they're not really goddesses. I don't know if you get it, but if they're not goddesses, that means they're within reach." Issei began to mutter things to himself. Words Kuryuu didn't understand slipped from his lips. Even so, she still understood one thing. Issei saw girls like Ria's Gremory, Akino, or Kaneko as goddesses. This did nothing but make her sigh in disappointment. "Is that so?" she murmured under her breath, looking at Issei. "Then, did you really just want to practice being a bad boy with me?" she thought, clenched her teeth in anger, and felt a little betrayed. "Goddesses, huh?" Kuryuu repeated, looking at Issei again. A moment later, she raised her hand. Smack! The girl's palm slapped hard against Issei Hyoudou's right cheek, producing a sharp sound that echoed all the way to Itachi's ears. Issei stood frozen, his head forced slightly to the side by the slap, his eyes slightly dilated, unable to grasp what had just happened. "This girl, Akira Kuryuu, you!" Issei murmured. He quickly looked back at Akira with anger, but in the next moment, his eyes turned a bit glossy. The girl returned his gaze with a mix of contempt, sadness, and fury. "You think I got close to you because of Itachi, don't you?" she asked, her sharp voice dripping with unhidden sarcasm. "Idiot!" Kuryuu finally shouted, Over a year ago, when I saw you walking and talking with Itachi, joking with him, I actually admired you. How could a normal guy like you talk with Itachi? She said, biting her lower lip before locking eyes with Issei. I thought you were cool. I decided to get closer. At first, I thought it was great that we had similar interests. And then, over time, I started to care more and more. Kuroiwa lowered her gaze. Deep down, she didn't blame Issei for calling Rias a goddess. She blamed herself for not fitting in that category. I know, it's impossible for me not to know. I tried to change, but I always end up flirting with other guys, telling them to have a nice time with me. That makes me unpleasant, doesn't it? Akira stepped a bit closer to Issei. The poor guy didn't know why Akira was so upset, why she had suddenly exploded. He thought for a moment, and then remembered. He had invited her to come practice with him. He was practicing being a bad boy, but for some reason, Akira had been more excited than usual today. She had responded with elegance and almost desperation with a yes. To everything he said, he hadn't understood it at the time, but Akira had misunderstood everything. Chapter 32, Reality Check 2. But I'm being serious now, Issei. Do you want to spend a beautiful, eternal moment with me? Akira looked up, her shining eyes focused on the boy's face in front of her. She extended her hands and wrapped her arms around his waist, then smiled. Issei stayed silent for a moment, squinting slightly, looking at the girl with emotion. He stared, almost too surprised, at Akira's sparkling eyes, and finally sighed with a hint of emotion. You know, it's rare, Issei said, slightly understanding Akira's words and intentions. You certainly have a pretty face, but... The but in Issei's words caused a flicker of pain to pass across Akira's face. Finally, Issei said, I always wanted a girl to confess her love to me. In fact, that might be one of the secondary reasons I tried to seduce Rias and the others. Issei extended his arms, stepped forward and hugged Akira tightly, pressing her small face against his chest. He sighed again and finally spoke. Thank you, Akira. Why don't we spend a beautiful eternal moment together? He asked. However, Issei's voice sounded distant, almost devoid of emotion and filled with falsehood. His body was the same, while the poor boy's face filled with several questions. Wasn't this what I wanted? A girl confessing her love to me, to be attractive to a girl. Issei, now feeling what it's like to be wanted by a girl, felt empty. This shouldn't be happening, why? Even though she's not voluptuous, at least she's cute to some extent, the boy wondered in his mind. However, ha 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 ha, D-Drake laughed inside Hyoudou Issei's mind, causing the poor boy to shift from confusion to slight anger in an instant. Boy, you're far too young and inexperienced. Sometimes I wonder why I reincarnated inside you. D-Drake mocked Issei from within and then went silent. The poor boy stayed there, hugging Akira a moment longer. However, Kuroiwa wasn't stupid. He's lying, she murmured in a voice so low it was inaudible. She knew Issei wasn't telling the truth and she knew why, but even so, she stayed silent and accepted Issei into her heart. Itachi watched all this from a distance with an almost demonic calm. He felt that Issei still had a lot to learn, then he left. The ninja soon arrived at the third floor where his classroom was located. He walked down a hallway observing the students and once again caught something unusual. In a classroom where classes had already started, a small white-haired girl wearing beautiful clothes was staring out the window. The little girl immediately caught Itachi's attention. She was Kaneko. Something's wrong, Itachi murmured. He knew this little cat girl well, and she always paid attention in class. But for some reason, today she wasn't listening to the teacher, she was only staring out the window. Itachi was about to throw something at the little cat girl to tease her when he noticed something peculiar. Are you Itachi? The soft voice of a girl echoed near the ninja. He didn't turn around, kept looking at Kaneko for a moment before opening his mouth. I can feel the demonic aura in you, but you don't seem like someone who intends to attack me. Who are you? There was a brief silence. Something in the air made Itachi turn around to observe the new girl who had approached him. Immediately upon seeing her, Itachi couldn't help but smile. Damn it! Sona, I already told you dressing up as someone else won't make me go out with you. Itachi said with a wide grin, threw a small paper ball toward Kaneko's head, then looked at the girl in front of him. Are you referring to my little sister? The girl said, then narrowed her eyes with some malice, stepped forward and looked at Itachi with fire in her eyes. What did you just say about going out with my sister? By the way, my name is Serafal, I'm not Sona. Itachi, however, shook his head upon hearing the girl's voice. She was wearing a formal outfit with a long green blouse and a matching black skirt. He raised his hand and grabbed one of Serafal's pigtails. Sona, short hair looks better on you, and you don't need to wear extensions just to get my attention. Itachi smiled, then pulled one of Serafal's pigtails with some force. Ai, Serafal tilted her head from the pull. She narrowed her eyes again, this time with more malice. Itachi, are you messing with me? Again, I. She couldn't finish speaking. Itachi pulled her other pigtail hard. Ai, Itachi, Itachi. Serafal repeated Itachi's name several times as the ninja alternated pulling one pigtail, then the other. Haha, Itachi chuckled quietly. Even though he was only teasing and knew the girl in front of him wasn't Sona Citri, but probably the Serafal that Sona always talks about, Itachi really enjoyed messing with this demon lady. Isn't it a bit early to be dealing with demons? Itachi thought to himself as he continued playing with Serafal's two pigtails. Itachi, I? Serafal made a strange sound, her face blushed. Something about the sensation of her pigtails being pulled was too pleasurable. Serafal thought. She didn't stop Itachi's actions for that reason. She just blushed slightly while staring at Itachi's handsome face. Itachi? Serafal murmured again. She began to raise her head a bit on purpose to feel the roots of her hair being tugged harder, and couldn't help letting out a soft moan. Itachi stopped, looked at Serafal. He had heard the small moan, saw her slightly blushed face, and finally opened his eyes in surprise. If Asia were here, she'd definitely make a scene, the ninja thought, then feigned shock almost too dramatically as he lowered his gaze and looked at Serafal's chest. Sona, Itachi murmured. Serafal stomped the ground in anger. She was about to speak when Itachi placed a hand on her shoulder. Did you get surgery? Itachi asked. There was a brief silence. Serafal lowered her head slightly, clenched a fist, then raised her head, stared at Itachi's annoyed but handsome face, and hesitated for a moment. It's a shame there's still no fix for your height, but that's fine. A lowly with boobs is always valuable. Itachi grinned widely after saying those words. You're dead, Serafal murmured, raised her fist directly, and punched Itachi in the face with enough strength to kill a normal man. However, boom! There was a small noise. The moment Serafal's punch landed on Itachi's face, he exploded into a cloud of white smoke. The students who had been watching curiously from afar saw this with surprise, quickly assumed it was a rehearsal for a school play, and didn't hesitate to applaud. What? Serafal's eyes widened. A slight chill ran down her spine. She looked to both sides, then at the nearby students clapping, and finally she looked at her fist. It was impossible for him to be an illusion. I felt his presence here like he was really. Serafal murmured in a voice too low to hear. Then she looked at the students around her, smiled slightly, and simply walked back to where Sona Citri was. Itachi, huh? Seems like a ninja is more special than I initially thought. Serafal murmured in a very low voice before continuing on her way. However, far from the school, in a forest, the real Itachi was training his reflexes when he received the memories of the clone. He stopped jumping between the trees, looked at the sky, and finally let out a light sigh. Serafal, looks like the sister Sona always talks about has arrived and is looking for me however. Itachi narrowed his eyes slightly with caution, then simply continued with what he was doing. Chapter 33, Demons Knocking at the Door. Some time later. Itachi, I did it. Asia Argento moved her body with grace and gentleness, raising her hands as if trying to reach for Itachi. Her eyes sparkled with a sweet tenderness, her cheeks were flushed, and her kind demeanor made her look like a little porcelain doll. What did you accomplish? Itachi raised a hand and placed it on the small Asia's head with a smile. Just the level to walk on water, HMPH, you still need more control over your chakra, Itachi said. They were both standing on a small lake in Itachi's courtyard, walking on water using chakra. Asia puffed out her cheeks and looked at the boy with a hint of resentment, though a playful feeling surged through her body. Itachi is, she thought. After all, she had seen the surprise in Itachi's eyes for a moment. She believed that managing to walk on water just days after opening her chakra points was impressive. Itachi, why won't you just tell the truth and praise me? Asia puffed out her chest, quickly approached him, and hugged Itachi while laughing out loud. The boy didn't push her away. He simply opened his arms to receive Asia Argento into them. You have talent, Itachi murmured softly, slightly surprised by Asia's quick progress in chakra control. However, at that moment, they heard the sound of the front door. Someone had come to visit. Asia lifted her head and looked toward the main door with a confused expression. Finally, Itachi picked Asia up in his arms and walked out of the small lake. Stay in your room for a moment, okay? Itachi said. His senses had warned him of something odd about the visitors outside, shadow clone. He made a hand seal before summoning a shadow clone that took Asia by the hand and led her back to her room. The real Itachi narrowed his eyes and walked gracefully toward the front door. Once there, he glanced through the peephole. Outside, standing calmly, were two people. One of them a man Itachi already knew, Riser Phoenix. The other was a bit different, long red hair, a rather handsome face, and an elegant bearing. Behind them, barely visible, was the girl Itachi had met before, Seraphal. HMPH. The ninja made a hard-to-interpret sound, then slowly opened the door, revealing the full bodies of the three elegantly dressed demons outside. Riser Phoenix narrowed his eyes and instinctively took a step back. Looking Itachi in the eyes, a strange sensation ran through his body, filling him with caution. Itachi, he murmured softly. Seraphal smiled, took several steps forward, and looked at Itachi. Her bright eyes scanned the ninja's entire body before settling on his face. Itachi Uchiha, ha, she said, showing a dazzling white-toothed smile. Sona has told me a lot about you, so much that... She narrowed her eyes. I even wondered if you had made my little sister fall in love with you, ha, she said. However, the ninja could sense a dangerous undertone in her voice. Please, Seraphal, Riser. The red-haired man lightly cleared his throat, and as if receiving a silent command, both Riser and Seraphal composed themselves and returned to elegant postures. The red-haired man nodded repeatedly, smiling broadly as he looked at Itachi. His eyes filled with a particular curiosity. He really is just a human, he thought to himself, then he extended a hand forward. Sir Itachi, my name is Surzech Lucifer. I am the current highest-ranking demon king in the underworld, Surzech said with pride, smiling brightly and keeping his hand extended for a handshake with Itachi, but that never happened. There was a brief silence. Itachi stared at Surzech. The latter stood there in an awkward position. His bright smile slowly began to fade, his face shifting to one of mild disappointment as he puffed out his cheeks slightly. I'm Itachi Uchiha, but everyone calls me Itachi, hee. The ninja smiled, finally extending his hand and shaking Surzech's outstretched one. Lucifer sighed in relief when Itachi finally shook his hand, and then got a mischievous idea. Grip. Surzech grinned slyly and tightened his grip on Itachi's hand. The ninja did the same. Surzech increased the pressure again, and both of them simultaneously kept going. Well, Seraphal smiled, watching curiously as Surzech and Itachi locked eyes, squeezing each other's hands with growing intensity. A mischievous smile crossed her face. She stepped to the right and placed her hand on Surzech's shoulder. Ice magic, Seraphal murmured softly, and in the next moment, Surzech felt a chill sweep through his entire body. What? He muttered, his eyes quickly darting back to see Seraphal's mischievous hand on his shoulder. Itachi, for his part, increased the pressure of his grip. Surzech let out a slight groan of pain. The cold spreading through his body prevented him from continuing to increase his physical strength in his normal state. I could transform into my demon form, but... Surzech looked around. Itachi's hand kept squeezing tighter. Eventually, he sighed. All right, you win, Itachi, you're strong, Surzech said. Itachi smiled, pulled his hand back, and gave Seraphal a strange look. Great, Seraphal gave a little hop. Itachi is, as always, the best, she said in a cheerful voice. You talk like you've known Itachi for a long time, Riser said. After a brief exchange of words, the three demons entered the ninja's residence. They admired the decor with smiles and eventually arrived at the living room. Sir Itachi, I'll get straight to the point, Surzech said, sipping some tea that Itachi had brought, and finally sighed. It is impossible for you to duel Riser for my sister's hand. He shook his head, seemingly a bit disappointed. In any case, if you want my sister's hand, you must speak with Riser and come to an agreement. Surzech smiled, looked kindly at Itachi, and gave him a nod. Wait, what? Itachi almost spit out the tea he was drinking. Ria's Gremory's hand? Itachi narrowed his eyes, looked at Surzech, and his pupils dilated slightly. He made a face of displeasure before opening his mouth again. Why would I want a demon's hand? What would I do with just her hand? Isn't that some kind of weird fetish? Itachi asked repeatedly, but his words quickly threw the room into a deep silence. Ha 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 ha! Seraphal couldn't help bursting into laughter. She patted Surzech's back hard. Mr. Demon King, why are you offering your sister's severed hand to a human? She mocked him while continuing to laugh. Riser, on the other hand, facepalmed in disappointment. He seemed to be thinking, is this guy really that powerful? Before shaking his head. Surzech remained calm, drank from his teacup, and didn't seem to care about Seraphal and Riser's reactions. Sir Itachi, please, I know you understand what I meant. Don't make crude jokes. Surzech's warning was sincere. A strange demonic energy flooded the small room, putting pressure on Itachi's body. The ninja narrowed his eyes, stared at Surzech, and opened his mouth again. I've heard you're the most powerful and prestigious demon king. May I ask why you came to see me personally? He murmured. His eyes grew serious, and his body was ready to activate his Mangekyo and unleash several attacks. The shift in Itachi's demeanor quickly calmed the atmosphere. Seraphal narrowed her eyes upon seeing it. Riser swallowed nervously. He felt like a puppy trapped in a cage with tigers. Actually, I came to talk about the person you warned us about, Surzech said. He sipped from the teacup and acted as if the change in Itachi's attitude didn't affect him, but internally, he was truly surprised. Just his gaze. Chapter 34, Deal with the Demons. Itachi narrowed his eyes. Orochimaru, he said, finally letting out a long sigh before beginning to tell the story of Orochimaru. After a while, Surzech squinted. Orochimaru's story really made him recall what happened during the ancient war. He lifted his head with curiosity and finally sighed. Actually, although we didn't know his name, we have received reports about this person called Orochimaru, Surzech said, making a grimace as if pondering something before speaking again. 6 months ago, a very pale-skinned person was sighted. He killed Ruvel Phoenix and took his body away. We only know this thanks to a high-ranking demon who managed to escape. By your description, it must be that Orochimaru. After Surzech's words, Riser squinted, his body completely stiffened, his eyes focused on Itachi, and it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. 4 months ago, more than 10 high-ranking demons from the Baal, Belphegor, Baal and Agar's clans were killed by that same pale-skinned person, Surzech said before sighing. 2 months ago, a high-ranking demon from the Belphegor clan was found with strange cracks on his body, black eyes, and a dead gaze. His power had increased considerably, and he was completely tireless, incapable of being killed. Surzech began to narrate how a group of demons encountered a strange high-ranking demon who had previously killed members of the Belphegor clan. After Lucifer's story, Itachi opened his mouth again. It's probably Edo Tensei, a forbidden technique to revive the dead. Once revived, they are tireless, they won't die. He paused. Itachi looked at the demons before him and finally spoke again. They should have infinite chakra, but since you don't use chakra, I don't know if Orochimaru modified the technique so the revived have infinite magic or something like that, he concluded. Surzech nodded several times. What do you think Orochimaru's goal is? There was a brief silence in the room before Itachi broke it. I don't know exactly. He seems to have changed since the last time I saw him. He's different, but it's better to kill him, Itachi quickly concluded. Surzech nodded, smiled at Itachi, and gestured to Seraphal. She opened her eyes and smiled. Itachi, actually, although you can't participate in a duel against Riser, we can offer you something else. Seraphal paused, smiled like a cute girl, then continued. What do you think about becoming a demon? Not a servant of demons, but a special demon. Ajuka can help us. You would have your own peerage and found a clan in the underworld. Seraphal pulled a box about the size of a small head from her bag and placed it on the table in front of her. What do you think about founding the Uchiha clan in the underworld? We would add you as one of the main demon clans. You would also be granted a territory, servants, and lots of money. Serafal began listing the benefits of becoming a demon. Itachi had to admit, he felt tempted. Now they weren't offering him to join a peerage. They offered him his own peerage, to become one of the 72 main demon clans, the 73rd clan. Serafal finished speaking, smiled at Itachi confidently, and pushed the strange black box toward him. "So what do you think?" she asked. However, unlike what Surzech, Riser, or Serafal expected, Itachi didn't accept quickly. Instead, he looked at all three. "What do you want from me in return?" he said. He wasn't foolish. He knew these demons wouldn't easily give something so valuable. "Heh," Serafal laughed lightly. Surzech did the same, and Riser remained silent. "Actually, we want the theory of chakra and the techniques that can be used with this new energy." Surzech smiled at Itachi, lightly slapped the table, and said, "Techniques about the use of chakra, huh?" Itachi smiled, grabbed the black box, and began playing with it in his hands. "That's really a lot for me." Itachi made a gesture of regret. "How about this, Sir Surzech? I will give you all my knowledge about chakra use and theory in exchange for becoming part of the demon clans and Serafal's hand in marriage," Itachi said, his voice serious and his eyes focused on the demon lady. There was a brief silence. Itachi smiled brightly. In fact, he didn't do this because he had fallen in love with Serafal, but because he once read in a negotiation book the phrase, "Start with an impossible offer, then say your real offer to convince your rival." If I ask for Serafal's hand in marriage, then when she refuses, I can ask for Ajuka's support to see if it's possible to connect this world with the ninja world. Itachi's eyes shone at this possibility, and he licked his lips internally thinking of seeing Sasuke married. "Besides, these guys don't seem willing to let me go," Itachi thought, his eyes mainly focused on Surzech, the demon who, although relaxed, emitted a powerful presence. Itachi didn't dare try to fight him. After all, Asia was still in this house. He had thought about activating the Manjikaiwu at the beginning, fighting, and then escaping with Asia. But Itachi has doubts after talking for a while with Surzech. However, quite bold. Surzech smiled and began laughing loudly. Riser to his right watched Itachi with wide eyes. His heart stopped for a moment, and his expression was total confusion. "Asking for Serafal's hand in marriage?" "Itachi," Riser opened his eyes even wider, looked at Itachi, and in his mind formed a spectacular scene. Itachi standing atop a platform, the sun shining behind him, making him look spectacular. "Sir Itachi, no, God Itachi, you're really amazing," Riser thought before beginning to smile brightly. However, Serafal blinked several times, pointed at herself confusedly, looked at Itachi, then at Surzech, then back at Itachi. Her eyes began to dilate as her gaze became brighter and brighter. "Marry a stranger from another world?" she asked somewhat loudly. Her tone seeming puzzled and a little annoyed, she narrowed her eyes and focused her gaze on Itachi. Well, it's a bit unreasonable, isn't it?" Itachi was about to make a sort of negotiation, removing the part where he would marry Serafal for Ajuka's help, when his ears caught a particular response. "I accept," Serafal said, almost shouting. She patted her chest and looked at Itachi with bright eyes. Upstairs, Itachi's clone was playing with Asia. Suddenly, they heard a loud "I accept," coming from downstairs and stopped. "Itachi, what was that?" Asia asked. However, the clone of Itachi shook his head. "It's not like I have a mental connection in real time or anything like that, he said. However, Asia narrowed her eyes, felt like hitting someone, and simply shook her head. Itachi was completely stunned. What happened to the lessons from the book? He asked himself repeatedly as Serafal blushed, took several steps forward, kissed him on the cheek, left the black box, whispered, "See you soon," and then the three demons retreated through a portal. What happened to the lessons from the book? What happened to the lessons from the book? What happened to the lessons from the book? Itachi kept asking himself repeatedly. The black box in his hand glowed slightly. Itachi, still surprised, looked down. Surzech had told him how to use the box to become a special demon and how his peerage pieces would condense in front of him after using the box. Heh, Itachi began to laugh slowly, looked at the box with a forced smile before clenching his teeth. It's impossible, the book failed this time. He muttered. He felt cheated and thought maybe he should ask for a refund from that scammy book. Chapter 35, The Foolish Boy. The next day at Kuoh Academy. Sitting on a large sofa, watching people walking by the window, a boy and a girl sighed with some disappointment. Both seemed slightly upset, their eyes a bit dull, and they hugged each other lightly as if consoling one another. Itachi, I don't think I can defeat Riser Phoenix, I'll become his wife. Rias murmured. She was the girl sitting on the sofa, and Itachi was seated to her right on the same couch. They embraced as friends while watching people walking on the street. Rias, let me ask you, is it possible to say that asking for Seraphal's hand in marriage was a joke? Itachi asked. Rias looked at him for a moment before shaking her head. Are you joking? The entire underworld knows the news about a new demon clan being founded, the Uchiha clan, and that the leader of this family will marry the demon lady Seraphal, Rias said. She raised her hand to gently pat Itachi's head before sighing. The ninja thought for a moment. The idea of escaping his engagement with Seraphal crossed his mind. He looked at Rias, and she returned the gaze. They looked at each other. It wasn't psychic or mental, but they both understood the intentions in each other's eyes. Rias smiled and shook her head. Do you want to become a fugitive of the underworld? Impossible, no matter how powerful you are, my older brother can defeat you, Itachi. Rias said seriously. After talking for a while longer, Itachi decided to leave the occult club. He was here only to learn more about the demons, so he used the basics from the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, that he had read at 5 years old to gain Rias' trust. After talking for an hour with Rias, she began to open her heart and trust Itachi. Then both watched the street for hours while the girl shared secrets and trivialities of the underworld, helping him get a better idea of what the underworld is like. Itachi looked at the cloudy sky with some raindrops falling and quickly entered the academy, then walked down the hallway. After a moment, his eyes caught something peculiar. Issei Hyoudou, his good friend, was in his classroom. To his right was a smiling Akira Kurohyou who seemed to be talking non-stop. Meanwhile, Issei looked somehow sad, anxious. Itachi narrowed his eyes, watching Issei for a moment. Issei quickly noticed his gaze. The poor boy immediately cheered up and greeted with a raised hand, Itachi. Kurohyou looked at him with narrowed eyes. Itachi noticed hostility in her gaze, something that really surprised him. Why? He wondered mentally. This girl, Kurohyou, had always looked at him with an almost fanatical and predatory expression. A strange feeling passed through Itachi's body, but he still approached the pair, occasionally watching Kurohyou's hostile eyes. Hi, Issei, Akira, Itachi said. Issei smiled, patted his chest, gave a half smile, and then stood up. Bro, it's good to see you, I missed you. Why don't you visit me as much as before? Issei said, quite animated. He hugged Itachi strongly as he stood. However, Akira simply nodded her head, watching this scene with narrowed eyes, clenched fists, and a disposition Itachi had seen before. Bro, Issei hesitated, stepped away from Itachi, and sat down again. He sighed with some tiredness before looking into Itachi's eyes. I've been thinking about your words, he said, patting the table a couple of times before smiling. The skin of an ugly woman is the same as the skin of a beautiful woman. The bones of an ugly girl are the same as the bones of a pretty girl. And a girl, no matter how pretty she is, still has all kinds of microorganisms and microbes living on her skin, so why? Issei narrowed his eyes and looked at Itachi. He seemed to have reached a kind of life philosophy. Why is it so impossible to stop idealizing? Issei asked, lightly raising his hand to touch his hair, observing Kurohyou to his right. The girl smiled tenderly, a complete contrast to her previous self that Itachi had seen. Everything is here, bro, Itachi said, touching Issei's forehead with a finger. He smiled and opened his mouth again. I once read a book about neuroplasticity. Maybe you'd be interested. It's called The Brain That Changes Itself. Why don't you try reading it? He withdrew his hand, looked at Issei, and smiled with some pride. Itachi thought he understood the reason behind Issei's abrupt change. He seemed to no longer look at girls like a maniac, but rather just a little bored. The ninja said a few more words before leaving. Issei stayed there, watching Itachi's back. He narrowed his eyes, and then Akira spoke again. "What's so special about that Itachi guy?" she asked, letting out a slight grumble after her words and patting her legs with apparent cheer. "My love, hee about yesterday. Let's do it again, okay?" Akira approached his shoulder, rested her head on it, and smiled warmly. Issei smiled, let out a soft sigh, and replied, "Yes, my love." "They say a barking dog doesn't bite, Issei," Drake murmured inside his mind. Issei ignored him and simply closed his eyes, recalling the previous night. Paraphrased NSFW section. He remembered being alone with Kuoh, and the two had shared an intimate and private moment that he had long desired. However, when it happened, he realized the excitement and thrill he had imagined were not as intense as he expected. He felt a sense of emptiness, noticing that the fantasy did not match reality. Holding Kuoh's hand and being close was pleasant, but it didn't evoke the overwhelming feelings he had anticipated. Time passed, and while Kuoh seemed happy and content with their interaction, Issei was left contemplative, realizing that his idealized notions of girls and romance were not as extraordinary as he had imagined. He reflected on Itachi's words, understanding that experiences are different from fantasies. Issei thought, "The physical differences between people don't matter as much as I imagined. The sensation is similar. What truly matters is the bond and the value I place on someone, not superficial traits." The next day, he even tried to recapture some of that connection with Ria's gremmery by holding her hand, only to realize again that the feeling was the same as with Kuoh, pleasant, but no longer thrilling. Drake explained inside Issei's mind, "You idealized girls because you lacked experience. Once you gain experience and exposure, the illusion fades. Now focus on yourself, grow stronger, and stop being distracted by fantasies."